Okay. Good morning. Good morning. This is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of Nonprofit Utopia, and I want to welcome you to today's session. We're focusing on strategic planning for the month of August. We started off by looking at how we can analyze our communities, look at the needs and the assessments, and then we talked about the theory of change, looking at the issues in our community and ways that we can come about analyzing data and coming up with solutions to those problems. Today, we're going to focus on stakeholder analysis. And as you may or may not be aware, your most successful strategic planning processes engage people at all levels. So this could be board members, this could be people who work for the organization, this could be clients, and all of those people, anybody who has a vested interest in the outcome of whatever the decisions of a nonprofit are, whatever their programs are, anybody who's impacted by organizations are what we call their stakeholders. So we're not going to do a PowerPoint presentation today. I'm just going to go right into it and share with you some of the tools that I use in my strategic planning processes with my clients to help them to actually create an environment where they're creating a strategic plan that involves everybody who is impacted and then keep those people engaged over time. Alrighty. So if you want to know more about Nonprofit Utopia, you can go to nonprofitutopia.com. That's our public website, or you can go to nonprofitutopia.mn.co. And you can also scan this little box here, a little QR code, and that will give you a business card with links to our various social media sites. All right, so without further ado, I am going to share my screen and share with you some of the tools that I use. All right, so you may have been with us about a month or so ago when we focused on developing a blueprint for your organization. And that is, looking at ways that you can assess your organization's capacity. And once you get the results, you then figure out ways to increase the capacity. Well, you can do that tool, that assessment tool, for a number of purposes. And today we're going to talk about how it can be used for your strategic plan. All right. And these tools, they can be tailored to whatever your focus is. But this particular capacity assessment tool, I think, is pretty broad and comprehensive. It will help organizations to look at a number of different issues across the organization. Sometimes when organizations go through a strategic planning process, they're just focusing on one issue, and then the capacity assessment tool will be developed so it focuses more heavily on a specific issue that they want to focus on. All right, so this tool is in alignment with the tools that most of our foundations, our major foundations in the city of Chicago, use. So it starts off with board governance, and board governance is basically the way a board manages itself and the organization and how it makes decisions. And there are a number of questions here as they relate to best practices, and organizations or whoever is responding, and it should be someone who is pretty familiar with the organization. They can go through a process where they are assessing on a range of 1 to 5, give themselves a score. And it doesn't help to try to pad your scores. It's really important to be as honest as you can as you respond to these questions, so that the organization, as they do brainstorming, can really assess where they are in a realistic way, and then develop realistic strategies. All right, so you start off with board governance. After that, there are 5 questions on financial management, questions on fundraising, human resources, and impact. And this impact question, or these series of questions, get to the point of helping you to understand whether or not you actually measure the outcomes for the work that you do, and and looking at whether or not you actually use tools that will help you to measure and keep track of that stuff. All right, and then the next thing is program management. And after that is the networking session. So organizations that have strong networks within communities and beyond their communities are more likely to build their capacity to, to grow, to serve their clients, and actually make sustained change. And then this section is for those organizations that are focused on, getting state funds. And when I say state funds, I'm talking about from the state of Illinois. And these are a series of questions that you check either yes or no. And you're not ready to apply for state of Illinois funds unless you can say yes to every one of these questions. So this section is an all or nothing. And the way this works is every section has a subtotal. So you would add up those totals, and then you would average the numbers within every category. And then you have a slot where you can actually have a grand total. So you're doing the average of everything. So the number for the grand total, that gives you a snapshot of what your overall capacity is. And these averages and subtotals for each section, they give you a sense for how strong or weak you are in that particular area. And when you do your analysis, you want to be able to rank these scores from high to low to see where you're strong and where you might need to shore up your capacity. And that will help you to prioritize. Okay, so are there any questions about this form? All right, and I realize those of you who are in Facebook, you may have questions. I can't see your questions. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to post. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing this tool, and I will share another tool with you. And bear with me, I really don't like seeing my face so large. I want to adjust this camera view if I can. All right, it doesn't seem to have. Okay, I think that might be a little more bearable. All right, so now I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to show you a different tool. Now, when we're doing collaborations, and every strategic plan should be a collaborative process, in some instances, you're going to be collaborating with stakeholders who are not within your organization. And it's really, really important to understand who's around the table. So your stakeholders can be people like your board members. They could be partners that you think about working with. They could be your clients. They could be state agencies, elected officials, anybody who has a vested interest in the outcome of your work. And when you're working with several organizations and you really want to get an understanding as to what they can bring to the table and be able to collect that information in a very objective way, a good way to do that is with an organizational profile. So you're collecting information, you know, like their contact information. And in this case, you want to get a sense for the revenues that they've had, you know, from over the last 2 years, the number of years they've been in existence, the number of clients served, programs and services, their licenses, any products they might produce, any certifications they have, and then to indicate any projects or collaborations they're working on. And the reason why you want to get a sense for what they're working on is, one, you want to know what skills and, you know, what relationships they may have in the community, but you also want to be able to identify any potential for conflicts of interest. And you want to be able to identify that up front rather than go and build and then you find that one of your partners is undermining your efforts by taking information that comes out of your process and feeding it to another. All right, and you want to do this form right up front. And this section here where it talks about giving a description of the organization, who they are and what they've accomplished, that helps you to describe who this group is. You know, so once you collect these forms, you can, you know, eyeball the forms and get a sense for the patterns of competency within your group, and then you can also identify where you fall short. And the reason why we ask about the number of years in existence, the number of employees, and the number of clients served, and their revenues is that gives you a good way to, at a glance, give a snapshot of who this collective is around the table that is sponsoring the strategic plan. Even if it's your own organization's plan and you're involving other stakeholders, you still want to be able to say, you know, very succinctly who's involved. And using this form is a good way to collect that information across the board. If you rely solely on discussions and interviews, there's a good chance that you might get some information from some people and some, you know, different information and it not be consistent. And when you're writing a report, you want to make sure that everything is consistent. All right. So are there any questions about that? So we always want to start off, you know, with the organization, because, you know, the organization is, you know, the center of everything, and all of these stakeholders have some impact on, you know, have some impact on the organization that's doing the strategic plan. And it's really important to know who's around the table. Okay, are there any questions before I share my screen again? I want to share a few more worksheets. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Yeah.
I'm okay.
Okay.
That's my grandson.
Okay.
He's a little upset with my mother.
just a little bit.
He asked a good question.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Okay, I shared the wrong screen. Bear with me. This is what what happens when you have a lot of windows open?
Mm.
All right. So I want to share some other examples. Now, this is a form, this is a stakeholder analysis that I did for a client a while back. I think that this is a very useful tool. It's a good way to analyze who's sitting around the table with you and how they might be able to fit into the scheme of things. So as you can see in this row across the top, we have stakeholders. So that's our first column. Then we rate on a scale of 1 to 5 how influential this particular stakeholder could be in the work that we do. And then we ask ourselves honestly, is this stakeholder a friend? Is it a foe? This person is neutral, or this organization, is it neutral? And if they're not a friend, or if they're neutral, is there a way that they can be persuaded to support the organization's agenda? And then this next column, what they bring to the table, what are their skill sets? How can they help you? And if it's not a skill set, what relationships do they have? Any resource they have that will help move not only the strategic planning process forward, but once you're into the implementation phase, how can they help you keep things moving? And then this final column, how might we involve them? And then you think of ways you can bring them into the fold. And it's important when you bring on stakeholders that you engage them, because nobody likes to sit around watching the decisions that have been made by people, by core leadership. If you're going to take the time to invite people to participate, and if they're going to take up their time, the least any of us can do when we're leading these processes is to make sure that we engage them fully from start to finish. And when I say engage, I'm not talking about just doing an interview or having them do a survey. Most organizations tend to stop there, and then they go back into their little groups of, the usual suspects. You have to make sure that, when there are decisions to be made, when there are meetings where those decisions are made, that you invite people to the meetings. And if you see people who are silent, you need to think of strategies to pull them out, right? And then I also have another form that's very similar to this, but I extended it one row and included who would be the contact person, because all too often we can list these people and how they can help us, but we don't necessarily maintain accountability by putting a contact within our organization who is going to be reaching out to these people. And when that happens, things can fall through the cracks. All right. Are there any questions before I talk a little bit more about it? All right, so this stakeholder analysis, this was done for a network of agencies that deal with hunger issues in the Inglewood community. So it was a network of churches and nonprofit organizations that actually do food kitchens and other types of giveaways for people who are very low income, who are homeless, who are elderly. So they listed their clients, their stakeholders, and they started off with the clients, and that is the people who actually receive the services. Then they indicated that there were churches, community agencies, political figures, and funders. And then they listed how influential these people were in terms of helping them to achieve whatever goals they had. All right, so the clients obviously are very influential. They, on a scale of 1 to 5, they rank them a 5. The churches, 4.5. Community agencies, I'm sorry, Patrice, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I was coughing. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. And community agencies, a 5. Political figures, they gave a 3. Their funders, obviously, they gave a 5. Local businesses, they gave a 4. And notice that they only ranked the community members as a 3. Okay, so I thought that was pretty interesting. And then here they listed whether or not these stakeholders were friend or foe. And for the most part, the people that they listed were friends. When it came to community members, they said that they were friends for the most part, and there are occasional turf issues surrounding, I guess, a parking lot that they might use to provide services, at one of the locations. And then, as you can see, they went through a detailed analysis as to what the various clients, churches, and, the stakeholders could bring to the table. So for clients, they said that they bring the needs to us. They also encourage us. It was interesting how their clients, they're serving their clients, but their clients in turn encourage them. So that's a very, very positive relationship. They said the clients can be helpful by spreading the word, participating in planning or volunteering, or showing appreciation. So this is a clear example of how the clients are engaged at every level. So they were bringing clients to the table in the strategic planning process. But as you can see, that the clients are very, very appreciative and very engaged in the work that they do, that the organization does, and they reciprocate, by spreading the word and, encouraging them. And I'm going to go through a second example. And this example is the churches. So the churches contribute finance, space, volunteers, public relations, manage reputations, provide authenticity, and donations. So it's interesting too that when you look at what your stakeholders bring to the table, it's not always these hard and fixed assets. They're tangible things that they bring, and they bring the intangible. And sometimes the intangible can be even more valuable than the tangible. All right, so let's see. Local businesses, they participate in nutrition programs, provide discounts and deliveries. So if you were to map this out, you'll have a very complex map of what each stakeholder can bring to the table and how they can help not only develop your strategic plan, but you can see what strategies are possible once you know who's around the table, whether or not they're a friend or foe, and how you can involve them and make sure that you're not just listing their involvement, but making sure that you engage them authentically. All right. And this form is a collaborator analysis. And the way this differs, the first form that I showed you, this looks at all of the stakeholders. These people may or may not actually be official collaborators. Your collaborators are going to be people that you actually sit down with, once the strategic planning process is over and you put together the nuts and bolts of the programs that flow from the strategic planning process. These are going to be people that you enter into some sort of collaborative structure and agreement with, and they will be the ones constantly at the table, doing the work on a day-to-day basis. Your stakeholders, even though they're not with you on a day-to-day basis, they're still going to be impacted by your work, and there's still people who can promote your work, and you can still work with them, you know, I guess on the fringes, so to speak. So your collaborators are going to be, you know, in the trenches on a day-to-day basis. So here we outline the potential partners, the programs and services they offer, how their services complement the organization, what are the potential areas for collaboration and how that would be structured. And then you look at the pros and cons for collaboration. So in this case, they identify potential partners, first of all, as local businesses. And this could include banks, restaurants, grocery chains that are not participating in the food depository food rescue program. All right. And what do those businesses bring? They bring finances, they bring marketing outreach, they bring food drives. For example, the restaurants can do that. And some of the grocery stores, they could provide drop boxes and their own goods and services. And how do their services complement this particular client? And basically, it helps them to leverage what they already have. They get their food donations primarily from the Greater Chicago Food Depository, but if they work with the banks and the other businesses, they can increase their reach from a marketing perspective, you know, reaching to the various customer bases of all of those banks, of all those businesses, but they can also stretch their food resources. You know, if you've got food coming from the Chicago Food Depository, and then you got food coming from the grocery store, you know, that goes a long way. And if you run a soup kitchen, if you've got food coming from restaurants in addition to your own church or organization, then that leverages to stretch your food supply. Here, they said for potential area for collaboration, they could collaborate with community outreach. They could also work with the businesses to develop a letter writing campaign. These businesses can also provide a site for food donations and drop off. So the pros are the members of the community. They give the members of the community the opportunity to contribute. You know, everybody likes to feel good and have that halo effect. When they looked at the churches provide food pantries as well as other church services and ministries. And the churches complement this particular network by providing donations from other churches and helping them to leverage their food contributions, as I indicated before. And they could also have a great opportunity for exchanging information. The churches can provide volunteers and referrals and connections to other resources, quite frankly. And then the pros would be, they would enhance the network and reduce competition, reduce the duplication of services, and actually help the community to actually help the network to be more efficient in the distribution of the resources. All right, so the elected officials, they usually provide brochures and newsletters, and they're already communicating with the community. So since they're already communicating with the community through their brochures and newsletters, why not work with them to increase the reach of the network? And then the potential areas for collaboration is BAN could advertise or announce services, programs, and events through the elected officials' channels. The pros are they would increase visibility and reach a greater audience. The cons is they would need to navigate advocacy versus potential perception of being involved in partisan political efforts. All right, are there any questions before I move to the next tool. All
You're
right.
very clear. That's why I haven't had any questions.
Oh, okay, awesome, awesome. Thank you. So this next worksheet focuses on our clients. So again, the difference here, clients are stakeholders, but clients, you know, they also have their own interests, their own separate interests. And it's important, since you're really in the business of serving your clients and serving communities, it's important to do a deep dive on your clients as well. This will help you to really develop a target, and we'll talk about that Friday when we talk about the mission, vision, and core values. But when you look at this is really the core. You know, after you look at the community and what the community needs, the core is to clients and how you can help improve their lives. All right, so in this case, the clients, since this was a network of food pantries, the main clients are the member agencies, and what they need are money, volunteers, a nice location and facility. They need cooking equipment, refrigeration, supplies, including refrigerators. They need transportation, you know, to be able to transport their clients back and forth to the various food pantries. They need computers. They need a way to track their activities and keep records. They also need office equipment and fax machines. You know, I don't know how many people use fax machines right about now. This was a while ago. They need information about community events as well as help with community outreach. And what we provide, or what the clients provide in this case, are t-shirts, grant information, moral support, stipends, referrals and information, job listings, programming for agencies, i.e. nutritional centers, apartment listings, leadership training, turkeys for Thanksgiving, forum for an exchange of ideas, personnel and administrative support, newsletters, and recognition. So this, again, they're a network, they're an association, and they're looking out for their members, and their members are the various agencies. And we've got Ramona Taylor Williams joining us. Hi, Ramona, how are you?
I'm good, Valerie. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for joining us. We've got Leslie and we've got Patricia. So thank you, ladies, for joining us. And we've got folks watching us on Facebook as well.
Well, I was initially on Facebook, but I couldn't see the documents. So it was time for me to renew my membership. So I went ahead and renewed my membership, and that let me get onto the Zoom. So I'm happy to be here.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So when I'm on Facebook, only our faces are showing and the documents are not showing, or was it a matter of the type being too small?
The type was too small. I couldn't see it. You know how
Okay.
you know how it is when you get old folks' eyes, right?
I know, and I've had old folks' eyes from the day I was born, so I'm acutely aware. You see how close I am, and this is my computer, so I get it totally. So thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, I've just enjoyed the sessions, and I've learned so much.
Oh, awesome! Thank you. That makes me feel good. You guys make my day. Alrighty, so also what they've learned is, you know, after looking at what they bring to the table, they looked at the gaps in service. They need more email communication. They need public recognition for their members and volunteers. And I think it's really important that they recognize that sometimes they can get so caught up in the work that they don't take the time to acknowledge the work of their members and volunteers who make things happen. So the fact that they're including this in their strategic plan was, you know, a real plus. They also noticed that they needed more cooking equipment and more volunteers. And the alternatives they had were to, one, they could increase email communication to reinforce meeting outcomes, not to replace meetings, but I guess in this time of COVID-19, we are having to replace meetings with virtual environments. But at the time this was written, they wanted to make sure that they could increase communication electronically, but also maintain a presence physically. Another alternative would be to write press releases, provide certificates, and recognize volunteers at meetings and special events, and praise early and often. They could obtain referrals for reasonably priced equipment. They could develop programs such that membership can obtain volume discounts, and they could recruit volunteers from job placement programs. All right, now when it comes to their member agencies clients, their member agencies clients were senior citizens, people with diabetes and hypertension, the general soup kitchen and pantry clients. What they need at the time, and probably always will need, will be food, transportation, wheelchairs and ambulatory equipment, understanding their medications, and certified nurse assistants. And of all of that, this particular network, they recognize their place within what they could provide their members' clients, and that would be food, transportation, and well-being checks. And they could make referrals out to help them source those other needs, equipment for those other needs. Now, at that point, they had not identified any gaps in the services, and that's within their scope. And they hadn't identified any alternatives. They made the conscious decision to focus on their member agencies and how their member agencies could better serve their clients. I guess in hindsight, 2020 hindsight, I think this model could have been strengthened had they delved a little bit deeper into what their members' clients' needs are, and that could help them further strengthen the capacity of their clients. And don't get me wrong, this analysis here helped them to increase their organizational capacity, but you have to remember, we're all in business to serve our clients. So it would have been helpful, I think, for them to do a slightly deeper dive into their clients' needs.
How long does a strategic plan usually take to create?
It depends. There are some plans that could be done in a day.
Okay.
And those plans are really more or less brainstorming sessions where you look at all of the components, and you just kind of brainstorm each one. And when that happens, when you do it in a day, it's usually for a number of reasons. One, it might be you don't necessarily have the funding to pay a consultant for an extended period.
Okay.
Two, it might be because of time constraints. You might be working on a funding proposal, and the funding proposal might be due within less than a month's time, and you got all these moving parts, one of which is to really solidify how your group is going to work together. And you want to use this process to strengthen your proposal, really clarify how you're going to work together. All too often we get so caught up in meeting that deadline, it's not enough time to do an analysis, let alone a strategic plan. Another reason you might want to do a one pager is because, you know, people, a 1 day process is because people are busy. They don't have the time to commit over a lengthy period of time. So that's the case. So those are some instances where you might want to use a day. Typically, your more thorough strategic plans will take anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months. And then there's
Wow.
some, yeah, and there's some larger organizations that it might even take 9 months, you know, because they're so large and they have to get engagement from all of their departments. So
Oh, wow.
if you want to do a really um, comprehensive strategic plan, you're going to have to take time to get the data from the community. So you have to analyze things like demographics, but you're also going to have to talk to people. You're going to have to talk to potential clients. You're going to have to talk to board members. You'll talk to various stakeholders and get a sense for what their aspirations are, what their hopes are, what they do on a day-to-day basis, what what they would like to see happen. So if you're going to, take the time to really, really engage people and understand what they're feeling, so that when you do this plan, it's very informed. Because the worst thing you can do is go through this process of developing a strategic plan. You take your strategic plan and you build programs, and then nobody participates, because you didn't take the time to really, really understand what motivates people, what they need. And remember, we talked about not only what it is they need, but what is it that they want? What do they demand? Just because there's a need for it, and just because you have the assets to supply those needs, doesn't mean that people want it. So you have to really go through that process. And that, that takes time. Sometimes the research can take, 6 weeks to, 2 months within itself. But once you have all of that research together, then you pull everybody together and review the findings. And then that's where you go through, your brainstorming process. And your retreats, those could take anywhere from 1 to 3 days, depending on the time, the level of commitment, depending on the budget that people have. And then after that, whoever is in charge of the process, either a consultant or someone within the organization who's leading the process, they will take all of that information, synthesize it into a plan.
Okay.
Valerie, could I share?
Yes, ma'am, by all means.
I think also we're going through getting ready to enter into a strategic planning process for the organization, a small organization that stood up in 2017. And MCUP grew out of a funding opportunity that Duck Hill, Mississippi received in order to do climate change work and to mitigate flooding as the result of stormwater runoff, and then also youth development and all that. So the organization it was kind of like a cart, putting the cart before the horse as the result of. So we had to simultaneously carry out the deliverables in the RFP we submitted, and also build an organization. So we have successfully completed that grant. It was a $300,000 grant. That's enabled us to do some remarkable work. We developed a program called the Seeds, Achieving Sustainability Through Education and Economic Development Solutions.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes. And so we're completed with phase 1. That granting cycle has gone over. Now we're going into phase 2. What I would like to lift up is our strategic planning process is being driven by our mission. right, by our mission
Excellent.
statement. And we're looking at it from a two-pronged perspective. We're looking at it from an organizational development perspective and also a community building and community development and community engagement perspective. So we were fortunate enough to be able to do what you had suggested, that critical planning process. Right? So the community now has, the town now has a plan, two plans. One plan, action plan to address adaptation resiliency as the result of climate change and now COVID, right? And also to put in a, to work towards developing a regional food system, local food system to address the food deserts. So when we look at strategic planning, and also I'm just so happy that you premised this section on the theory of change, because your theory of change, or our theory of change, will have a major impact on how we vision our community and our organizations as we move forward. So I just would like to share that with the group and the participants here, because the strategic planning process is an understanding that it is a process. It is so critical to first building strong organizations and putting that strong organizational infrastructure in place that we need in order to build our communities and our houses. So I just wanted to lift that up so folks don't think that, you know, and I tell you, Valerie, these sessions are invaluable.
Oh, thank you.
Most of our organizations do not have the resources to hire the consultant to take us through the process. And what you've done, it's just remarkable. It is just remarkable, because you've given us the tools and the weaponry that we need in order to build strong community organizations, which is so critical, because that's what the funders look for. They look to see if we have that infrastructure in place. I want to thank you.
Oh, I want to thank you for that. And Ramona, I know we talked about having you come on to talk about redistricting and the census and all that good stuff.
Yes.
And I was thinking about sending you an email the other day to ask you about that. So now I got two things to ask you for.
All right, ask away.
Okay, so in addition to coming on, and you and I talk about it later, to talk about the census and redistricting, I would like for you to come on and describe what you just shared, I guess in a case study, you know, talk about your process, you know, because you're showing a real live process that engages several community organizations. And it would be great to see how you guys have done it and share with others.
I would I would love to. The Seeds Initiative has gotten, it's just been so wonderful, and it was just such a blessing. We have gotten national recognition. Our Creek Rangers program, which is our youth development component, was featured in Huffington Post and also the Heckinger Report. So I would love to share. Of course, we're in a rural area. It's very different. We may take different approaches and have to take different approaches in the urban centers. But the beauty of the urban centers is that urban communities have that infrastructure, the philanthropic infrastructure in place, and the corporate infrastructure in place, where they can seek funding in order to do major initiatives like that. You know, but I would love to share, Valerie, absolutely.
Okay, will you be able to do that before the month of August is over? And if not, we could do it in September too.
I think if we can squeeze it into August, that would be better, because we are funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to
Mhm.
stand up a community and youth leadership institute.
Okay.
And we launched the institutes, and they are separate. The youth very much and were very persistent that they wanted their own institute.
Mhm.
And so we launched on, excuse me, March the 11th and the 14th, 11th for the youth, 14th for the adults. Well, you know, that was the week that COVID hit.
Right. Okay.
So we had to totally pivot. And first of all, you know, like everybody, we went into a state of shock, right?
Mhm.
And we had to pivot from, go back and rethink the whole delivery system. You talked about partners and knowing how important stakeholders are. A lot of times, our grassroots and community-based organizations, we do not have the research component and the research arm.
Mhm.
The beauty of this initiative is that it brought that research arm and asset to our work. And our partners are the Urban Institute and Community Science.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you know, that's a big thing, huh? And,
Woo-hoo. That's a big thing to me.
so we were able to have that technical assistance that we needed in order to pivot from an in-person paradigm to a digital paradigm like we're doing right now with Zoom. Well, guess what? Our organization was so new, we didn't have the infrastructure in place, the technological infrastructure. And we did some technological needs assessments of
Mhm.
the fellows. We have 25 youth fellows and 25 adult fellows. And when we did the technological assessment, we found out that 99% of the fellows, the youth and the adults, did not have devices.
Wow.
They did not have access to the internet. And the only devices that they had were their phones, or they shared devices. So we had to go all the way back, look at our budget, the initial budget, and reprogram those resources in order to be able to address the needs. But the first thing we had to do was convince Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that we had to do this in
Mhm.
order to successfully carry out this program in light of COVID. And so they agreed. They agreed. So that partnership and having those, what I call critical and trusted and strategic stakeholders at the table.
Mhm.
Because we can just have bodies and they don't bring no value. You know, I'm
Oh,
telling you.
I know exactly. I know exactly what you're talking about. And
And
I'll leave it there.
and we'll leave it there. And I really appreciated you lifting up, and I'm going to shut up. I really appreciate you lifting up who is at the table and who we invite to our table. And all those folks who are around the table, are they friend or foe? Because they will come in and steal your ideas.
I got stories about that.
Okay. So I am just really, really enjoying the way that you are delivering this knowledge. I really am. And I'm going to be shut up, and we'll talk later about those other two items.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ramona. I really appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So yeah, I'll follow up. Alrighty. So here is our final worksheet. I went back and forth as to whether or not to hold the SWOT analysis for one session or to include it with something else. And I decided to include it with this because as you're working with different partners, it's important, you know, to analyze their strengths and their weaknesses as well. So you're going to do a SWOT analysis twice. One is with your individual organizations, and then you will come together and view the community and look at the collective and decide how that goes. So you only have to do the SWOT analysis twice if you're working with a different, if you're working with different groups to form a collaboration. And I don't even say you have to do it. It's something that I would recommend, because you want to know the strengths and the weaknesses of everybody around the table and how you can fill in those gaps. So in a nutshell, there are a number of ways you can do a strategic analysis, a SWOT analysis. And this is the format that I like, because you're looking at the strengths of the organization. Remember, the strengths and weaknesses, those are internal to the organization or the collaborative. You want to look at the key strengths that you have, and then how you exploit those strengths or ways to capitalize on those. And the way you understand the strengths and weaknesses is by going through all of those worksheets that I just shared. You want to know what the various skills are and experiences are, what people can bring to the table, blah, blah, blah. So you use all of that information from those worksheets, and you summarize and prioritize what the key strengths are and how you're going to capitalize. And then you look at the weaknesses or the challenges, some people like to say. And again, those are internal to the organization. What is it about the organization that can be a weakness? And how are you going to improve? And then typically and realistically, the strengths and weaknesses assessment, opportunities and threats, that comes after looking at what's going on in the community. And it really should come after setting your goals and objectives, because you don't really know whether or not your attributes are strengths or weaknesses until you know what the goals and objectives are of the group. Does that make sense? So I'm just sharing this now, and you'll see it again next week. All right, and then you look at the opportunities. The opportunities are those things that are happening that are beyond your controls. They're happening in the external environment. This could be at the community level. This could be at the city level. This could be at the county level, the state level, the federal level, the global level. What current situations are happening that could impact your ability to reach your goals or objectives? And then we look at ways that we can exploit those opportunities. So, for example, Obamacare, that was a great opportunity for some people. They were able to position their organizations to become navigators and create jobs that didn't exist before. So that was an opportunity. That was an opportunity, obviously, for the insurance companies. It wasn't something that the organization had any control over, but it was something that happened in the environment. And those of us who are smart and innovative and interested figured out a way to capitalize on that opportunity. A threat to the environment is, we got a new president who hated everything that Obama put in place. One of those things being Obamacare. And he whittled away at some of the provisions for that law. And that made it more difficult for certain organizations. So again, you have to look at what's happening that could impact your ability to move forward. And when we look at our strengths and weaknesses and how you can use that information. So for example, if we were to go back to our analysis of organizations and how we look at the scores, if we find that we have lower scores in board development, all right, so we know that might be an area that we need to focus on. So that whatever we find from looking at the board development scores, we might be able to list those as weaknesses. And then we come up with ways that we can make sure that those are not going to be a hindrance in our ability to reach the goals and implement the strategies in the strategic plan. The same way with the strengths. If you find through looking at the results of your assessment for the organizations, as well as looking at the form that pulls out, you know, the profile, you look at the key skills that are relevant to what it is you're trying to achieve. And then you also look at ways that you're going to use those strengths to help you achieve your goals. And as Ramona said, you always have to make sure that everything is in alignment with your mission. So we'll talk about mission, vision, and core values on Friday. So we've gone a little bit over time. Before we go, are there any questions, any concerns? All righty.
No, not for me.
All right, awesome. So
Thank you.
well, thank you. And for those of you who are not members of the nonprofit Utopia community, we would love for you to join. You can go to nonprofitutopia.mn.co and join us. And if you have any questions of me, you can contact me at ValerieFLeonard@nonprofitutopia.com. And you see this little QR code. If you point your phone to that code, you'll be connected to my business card. So just so you know. All righty. So without any further ado, I'm going to hang up, and I thank you ladies so much for joining us, and I'll make sure that I include these resources in our forum.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Talk to you on Friday.
Yes, ma'am. And
Be
Ramona,
safe. Okay.
Ramona,
Bye-bye.
I'll be in touch.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.